The book of Isaiah offers a gospel message as we continue our journey in Advent, now on the Accessible Faith Project. Hi there, I'm John, and welcome to the Accessible Faith Project. If you're new here and looking for insights into the Bible, faith, and history in ways that engage your brain, then please hit subscribe and that little bell icon so you receive a notification every time I upload a new video. As we continue social distancing, I've been using the Accessible Faith Project to provide worship and devotional resources in addition to my educational videos. This one is a sermon, but as with most of my offerings, learning a little bit of history and context goes a long way in helping us to understand it all. I remember once at an Advent worship service at Vancouver School of Theology, where Jim Lindenberger, the Old Testament professor at the time, was preaching. During the fall months at VST, each faculty member is responsible for the conduct and flow of community worship. Each takes turn leading and preaching with a group of students. In this case, when it came time for the gospel reading, Jim announced Isaiah 40 as the reading of the gospel. At first read, it might seem a little bit odd. We've taken gospel to mean the four collections of stories about the life and work of Jesus, namely Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But this time he announced that the gospel would be from the passage from Isaiah 40, not because it was considered a gospel in the classic sense of the word, but because Isaiah 40's powerful message is one of good news, of hope. After all, gospel does mean good news. As much as we read it and as familiar as we might be with its words, understanding where it comes from gives it so much more power. On more than one occasion, I have said that some of the most inspiring stories that we have in the Bible come out of the darkest moments in history. Isaiah 40 certainly fits the bill. The last 26 chapters of Isaiah, from chapter 40 through 66, were written several decades after the fall of Jerusalem that both Jeremiah and Ezekiel witnessed. Things were as dark as they ever were, perhaps even more so because so much time had passed since the fall, and it seemed as if there was no hope of the people of Israel returning to their beloved homeland. But then there came a glimmer. The Babylonian Empire's power was beginning to crack, and an insightful prophet began to write to help the people to prepare the way for their return to their homeland. And so the words begin. Comfort, O comfort my people. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that her penalty is paid, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. These were powerful words made all the more powerful in that the people were still in captivity and had all but lost hope. And so this was comfort for when they had none. And that whole line about penalty is paid and Jerusalem receiving double for all her sins was a way to interpret Jerusalem's fall. Before the Babylonian invasion, the people had become comfortable in their position in the world. They had become complacent about their faith and their unique witness that they had to the world. Despite prophets calling them back, they always seemed to wander away or take God for granted. We are the chosen people in the promised land, they would say to themselves, and not do anything else. They lived with a sense of entitlement and privilege rather than gratitude for the land they had. They've forgotten their roots. And amid their comfort, they presumed that God gave them carte blanche to do whatever they wanted, and God would simply protect them. Jerusalem would never fall, they believed, and even when the North Kingdom fell to the Assyrians centuries before, Jerusalem stood. And they presumed that the same would happen with the Babylonians. And in their comfortable arrogance, they had forgotten who they were. And then the unthinkable happened. Jerusalem fell to the invading armies, the temple was destroyed, and now the people of Israel scattered to the four winds, and many of them were taken prisoner and held captive in Babylon, left to contemplate their fate in uncomfortable surroundings. 2 generations later, it seems that they got the message. After 80 years of soul-searching, they began to understand God in a new way and sought to reclaim their identity rather than being complacent in it. Not only that, the political landscape was shifting, and there was a new power in the east and a real possibility of them heading home. The prophets saw this and began to tell the people to prepare. In the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain made low, and the rough places a plain. They were paving the way home, having learned their lesson and anticipating how they could reclaim who they were. But they learned this, hearing these words of comfort through their discomfort. It was a hard lesson, but they learned it. And the prophet's words were uncomfortable comfort in a sense because it came with the understanding of how they got there in the first place. But it took them 80 years of exile to figure it out. And exile is perhaps an excellent way to describe the experience of church decline over the past 50 years. We've lamented our loss of political clout and have wondered why people don't just simply walk through our doors like they used to. We are exiles in our backyard in many respects, but we've not learned the lesson yet. Pierre Berton's comfortable pew in 1965 was an early warning that sold well, but we've not learned that lesson. Like the people of Israel before the Babylonian invasion, we became very comfortable with our place of privilege in society. Too comfortable. We had forgotten what we were there for, and by 1965, things were already changing, but it wouldn't be until the 1970s that people started to panic about the decline. First, the church began to tinker, to try and fix things. For one example, the Presbyterian Church in Canada had a campaign to double in the 80s, an effort that not only failed, but actually accelerated the decline of the denomination. Now, more than 40 years later, the church as a whole is very much in exile, and we're still trying to figure this out. And if we're going to take the example of the Babylonian exile, we may only be halfway through this. It may sound pessimistic, but bear with me. Now is when the hope really kicks in. The Babylonian exile fundamentally transformed the faith of the Israelites. It laid the foundation for a genuine, core-up, ground-up transformation that radically altered their understanding of God. God went from just being a local deity among many to the Lord of all creation. The scattered people developed networks of communities across the Mediterranean and the Near East, and it would be among these communication lines in which early Christianity would eventually begin to spread. The faith of the Israelites had been transformed into something that would outlast the faith traditions of all the great empires of the day. It wasn't about fixing something, it was about adapting to their new reality. In the discomfort of the exile, the people of Israel rediscovered their faith. They adapted to their new reality and transformed into something entirely new, something that God was calling them to be. They began to understand that the exile was not because God was incapable of protecting them, but that this was indeed an opportunity to relearn and rediscover who they were and what God was calling them to be. There is a saying that Jesus came to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. And I'd agree. I think it's a reminder that as we go through our own time in the wilderness, it is truly an opportunity to rediscover and relearn who we are and what it means to be Christian in North America today. The church's discomfort has been because we were too comfortable in the way things were, and now God is calling us to reinvent and transform ourselves into something entirely new. And maybe we need to hear Isaiah's words again, not only his words of comfort, but also his call to action. In this wilderness that we are in, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight paths a highway for our God, learn to be the people that God is calling us to be, making a difference and responding to the needs of those around us, and see the potential, see the possibility, and rediscover what God is calling us to be. Amen.